Chapter 16. The Friendship Discovered. Once Batsuma Senju learned the identity of Hashirama's secret friend, he placed his son in an impossible position. Madara was not merely a child from another shinobi family. He was a member of the Uchiha clan and had already killed several experienced Senju warriors despite his young age. From Batsuma's perspective, Hashirama's friendship with him represented a serious threat. Madara could have been pretending to lower his guard while gathering information about the Senju, and Hashirama's trust could endanger their entire clan. Batsuma ordered Hashirama to continue meeting Madara and use the friendship to collect intelligence. If Madara discovered the plan, Hashirama was expected to kill him. Refusing the mission would cause the other Senju to view Hashirama as a traitor who had placed an Uchiha above his own family. Hashirama reluctantly agreed, but he had no intention of betraying Madara. By the time the boys prepared for their next meeting, the Uchiha had also discovered the truth. Madara now knew that the boy he had befriended was Hashirama Senju, a member of the clan responsible for the deaths of many Uchiha. Tajima Uchiha approached the situation in much the same way as Batsuma. He accompanied Madara to the river with Izuna, intending to use the meeting as an opportunity against the Senju. Neither boy arrived alone. Batsuma and Tobirama concealed themselves near Hashirama, while Tajima and Izuna remained close to Madara. Both sides expected the meeting to become a trap, and both fathers prepared to kill the opposing clan's child if the opportunity appeared. Hashirama and Madara understood what was happening before the confrontation began. Rather than exchanging their usual greeting, Madara suggested that they immediately skip stones across the river. The gesture appeared ordinary because stone skipping had been a part of their friendship since the day they met. This time, however, the stones carried warnings. The stone Hashirama sent across the river warned Madara to run. Madara's stone warned Hashirama that a trap had been prepared and that he needed to escape. Each boy had independently chosen to protect the other rather than obey his father. After reading the warnings, Hashirama and Madara ended the meeting almost immediately and attempted to leave. Their sudden departure revealed what they had done. Batsuma realized that Hashirama had warned Madara, while the Uchiha understood that Madara had done the same for Hashirama. Before either boy could escape, the adults emerged. Batsuma and Tobirama stood on one side of the river. Tajima and Izuna stood on the other. The friendship Hashirama and Madara had protected for so long was now exposed before the two clans that had taught them to regard one another as enemies. Batsuma and Tajima recognized that they were nearly equal in ability. A direct attack against one another offered no immediate advantage, so both men made the same ruthless calculation. Batsuma targeted Izuna, while Tajima targeted Tobirama. Each hoped that killing the other man's younger son would create the opening needed to win the battle. Hashirama and Madara reacted instantly. Hashirama intercepted the attack aimed at Izuna. Madara stopped the attack directed at Tobirama. Their actions prevented younger brothers from being killed and revealed where their loyalty stood. Even after learning one another's identities, neither Hashirama nor Madara was willing to allow the other's family to be murdered. The confrontation reached an impasse. Hashirama attempted to preserve the dream he and Madara had created, but Madara recognized that their friendship could no longer remain separate from the war between their clans. Their father stood ready to fight. Their brothers had nearly been killed, and the names they had avoided sharing now defined everything around them. Madara also understood that Hashirama was stronger than he was. Fighting the Senju at that moment would likely end in defeat for the Uchiha. Tajima, Madara, and Izuna therefore withdrew rather than continue the confrontation. Before leaving, Madara abandoned the dream the boys had shared beside the river. The friendship that had allowed them to imagine peace had been discovered and turned into another weapon of war. The emotional shock awakened Madara's Sharingan, the eyes that would eventually make him one of the most powerful figures in Shinobi history first appeared as he turned away from the closest friend he had ever known. From that day forward, Hashirama and Madara would no longer meet as anonymous boys beside a quiet river. The next time they faced one another, it would be as Senju and Uchiha on opposite sides of the battlefield. The confrontation at the river ended without a battle, but neither side considered it a victory. The Senju returned to their territory with the knowledge that Hashirama had knowingly protected an Uchiha. The Uchiha reached the same conclusion about Madara. What had begun as a secret friendship between two children had now become known to both clans, and there would be no opportunity to return to the peaceful afternoons they had shared beside the river. For Hashirama, the encounter confirmed something he had struggled to explain for months. The hatred between the clans was not sustained because every individual wished for war. It endured because each new generation inherited the fears, grief, and expectations of the one before it. Even when two people found common ground, the weight of history pulled them back towards conflict. Madara reached a similar realization, though his conclusion was more painful. He had believed that if enough people shared the same dream, the cycle of violence could eventually be broken. Standing beside the river, however, he had watched both fathers immediately attempt to exploit the meeting as an opportunity to eliminate the other's family. Neither man had paused to ask why their sons had become friends. Neither considered the possibility that the boys had discovered something worth protecting. To them, the existence of that friendship was simply another weakness an enemy might exploit. The dream Hashirama and Madara had built together suddenly seemed much farther away than it had only hours before. Although they had parted without raising their weapons against one another, both understood that the next meeting might not allow the same choice. They belonged to rival clans. Their fathers were clan leaders. Their younger brothers would one day fight beside them. Sooner or later, duty would demand that they stand on opposite sides of a battlefield. In the months that followed, both boys threw themselves back into training. Hashirama continued to develop the extraordinary abilities that had already begun distinguishing him from the other members of the Senju. His immense chakra reserves, remarkable endurance, and natural leadership became more apparent with each passing year. Yet despite his growing strength, he never abandoned the dream he and Madara had shared. If anything, the failure of their friendship only strengthened his determination to create a world where such a meeting would never again be considered impossible. Madara changed as well. Already recognized as one of the Uchiha's most gifted young warriors, he devoted himself even more completely to becoming stronger. The brief glimpse of another future had been replaced by the reality of a world in which he lived. Every battle claimed more lives. Every funeral deepened the hatred between the clans. The hope he had once allowed himself to feel beside the river became increasingly difficult to reconcile with the endless bloodshed surrounding him. Yet despite everything that had happened, neither boy forgot the other. Hashirama no longer saw the Uchiha as faceless enemies. Madara no longer believed every Senju deserved his hatred. That understanding would remain buried beneath years of warfare, waiting for the day circumstances brought them together once again. The next time Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha met, they would not meet as children. They would meet as warriors. Years passed after the confrontation at the river. The brief period during which Hashirama and Madara had been able to imagine another future came to an end. replaced once again by the relentless demands of the Warring States period. Their lives followed the paths their clans had prepared for them since childhood. They became warriors. The battle between the Senju and the Uchiha grew larger and more frequent. Feudal lords continued hiring the two clans to fight their wars, and with every new contract came another opportunity for old grudges to deepen. Entire generations of shinobi were raised knowing only conflict, and the names Senju and Uchiha became synonymous with the two greatest military powers in the known world. Hashirama quickly established himself as one of the Senju's strongest fighters. His extraordinary chakra reserves and natural talent had continued to develop. But what most distinguished him from the warriors around him was his unwavering refusal to surrender his ideals. Even after years of warfare, he remained convinced that peace was possible. Those who served beside him found themselves inspired not simply by his strength, but by his ability to see hope in a world that had given almost everyone else a reason to abandon it. Madara's reputation grew just as rapidly among the Uchiha. His natural genius in battle, combined with the awakening of the Sharingan, made him one of the clan's most formidable young shinobi. He led from the front, earning the respect of friend and foe alike through his skill and determination. Every victory strengthened the Uchiha position, but every victory also came at a cost. More comrades were buried, more families mourned their dead, and the hatred between the clans continued to deepen. Although years separated them from their childhood friendship, neither had forgotten what they had shared. Whenever Hashirama looked across the battlefield and saw the Uchiha banner, he knew Madara was somewhere among its ranks. Madara reached the same conclusion whenever he saw the crest of the Senju. The river where they had once skipped stones now seemed impossibly distant. The dream they had both spoken about as children had not disappeared, but it had become buried beneath years of bloodshed and responsibility. Each carried that dream differently. Hashirama continued searching for a path that could make it a reality. Madara increasingly questioned whether such a future could ever exist in a world where every attempt at peace seemed to be answered with another war. The cycle that had begun with Indra and Asura continued to tighten its grip on history. Another generation was repeating the same conflict. Another pair of extraordinary descendants stood on opposite sides of a battlefield, each believing they were protecting the people they loved. Yet despite everything that divided them, one important difference remained. Unlike the brothers who had come before them, Hashirama and Madara had known one another before becoming enemies. They had seen each other not as Senju and Uchiha, but simply as boys who dreamed of a better world. That memory would prove stronger than either of them realized. It would eventually lead them to challenge centuries of tradition, unite the two greatest rival clans in history, and create a village unlike anything the world had ever seen. But before that future could become reality, the Warring States period would demand an even greater price. Chapter 17. Brothers in Arms, Enemies by Fate. By the time Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha reached adulthood, they had become the greatest warriors their respective clans had produced. Their names spread far beyond the lands controlled by the Senju and Uchiha. Feudal lords sought their allegiance, rival clans feared their arrival, and experienced shinobi understood that the appearance of either man could alter the outcome of an entire campaign. What had once been a rivalry between two powerful families increasingly became a contest between two extraordinary individuals. Yet neither man had forgotten the river. Years of war had changed them, but the memories of their childhood remained. Whenever they encountered one another across a battlefield, they no longer saw only the leader of an enemy clan. They remembered the boy who had dreamed of ending the very conflict they now stood in the middle of. Those memories made every battle more difficult. The clashes between the Senju and the Uchiha grew increasingly destructive as both clans reached the height of their military power. Contracts became larger, armies grew in size, and battles that had once involved dozens of shinobi now involved hundreds. Villages were abandoned as the fighting swept across the countryside, while feudal lords continued hiring whichever clan offered the greatest chance of victory. Neither the Senju nor the Uchiha could afford to refuse. The survival of every clan depended upon the contracts they accepted. Food, weapons, medicine, and the resources needed to support their families all came from the rewards earned through war. Even leaders who longed for peace found themselves trapped by the realities of the age. Refusing to fight did not end a conflict. It merely allowed another clan to claim the contract instead. Hashirama understood this better than anyone. Although he never abandoned his hope for peace, he also recognized his responsibility to protect the people who depended upon him. Every Senju warrior who followed him had parents, siblings, children, or friends waiting for them to return home. If he failed, it was not only his life that would be lost, entire families could disappear. Madara carried the same burden. As one of the Uchiha's strongest warriors, every decision he made affected the future of his clan. The Uchiha had already sacrificed generations to survive the Warring States period, and Madara refused to allow those sacrifices to be meaningless. His determination to protect his family only intensified as the years passed, even if doing so required him to continue fighting the one person who truly understood his dream. Again and again, the two men crossed paths. Sometimes they fought directly. Other times they commanded different parts of a much larger battle, watching one another from across fields littered with the fallen. Neither gained a decisive advantage. Each encounter only reinforced what both clans had already begun to believe. There was no shinobi alive capable of surpassing either Hashirama Senju or Madara Uchiha. Their rivalry became the defining conflict of the era. To younger shinobi, they seemed almost larger than life. Stories of their battles spread from one nation to another, growing more legendary with every retelling. Some tales were undoubtedly exaggerated, but one fact remained beyond dispute. Whenever the Senju and Uchiha met, all eyes searched for the two men, Hashirama and Madara. The future of the shinobi world increasingly rested upon whichever one prevailed. The years of warfare extracted a terrible price from every clan. No matter how many victories the Senju or the Uchiha achieved, those victories were always accompanied by loss. Every successful campaign was followed by funerals. Every generation buried fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, and children. The names of the battlefields changed, but the outcome remained painfully familiar. Neither Hashirama nor Madara escaped that reality. Hashirama had grown up alongside several brothers, but one by one, the Warring States period claimed their lives. Each death strengthened his resolve to end the cycle of violence. To him, every fallen sibling became another reminder that no victory on the battlefield could ever truly compensate for what had been lost. The war had taken too much from too many people, and he had become increasingly convinced that only a completely new system could prevent future generations from suffering the same fate. Madara experienced the same tragedies, but they shaped him differently. Of all his brothers, only Izuna remained by his side. The two had fought together since childhood, surviving battles that claimed countless others around them. They trusted one another completely, their bond strengthened through years of shared hardship. Izuna was more than Madara's younger brother. He was the person who understood him better than anyone else in the world. The rivalry between the Senju and the Uchiha eventually reached another decisive battle. As it had many times before, Hashirama faced Madara, while Tobirama fought Izuna. During the fighting, Tobirama succeeded in striking Izuna with one of his techniques, inflicting wounds that proved impossible to fully recover from. Although Izuna survived the battle itself, the injuries continued to worsen despite every effort to save him. For the Uchiha, losing Izuna was more than the loss of a gifted shinobi. He was widely regarded as one of the clan's greatest talents and one of the few warriors capable of standing beside Madara in battle. His death represented another devastating blow to a family that had already sacrificed generation after generation to the endless war. As Izuna's condition deteriorated, he reached a decision that would forever alter his brother's life. According to the history preserved by the Uchiha, Izuna willingly entrusted his eyes to Madara. Having already awakened the Mangekyo Sharingan himself, Izuna understood that his own life was ending. Rather than allowing his power to disappear, he chose to give Madara the means to continue protecting the clan. By transplanting Izuna's Mangekyo Sharingan into his own body, Madara awakened the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. The blindness that inevitably accompanied prolonged use of the Mangekyo Sharingan vanished, while the power of his dojutsu surpassed anything previously seen within the Uchiha clan. For many outside the Uchiha, the circumstances surrounding the transplant became distorted over time. Rumors spread that Madara had stolen his brother's eyes to obtain greater power. Those stories endured for generations, but the account presented within the Uchiha's own history, and later confirmed during the Fourth Great Ninja War, is that Izuna gave his eyes to Madara of his own free will. Madara accepted his brother's final gift, but he could not escape the grief that came with it. Izuna had once shared the same dream that Madara and Hashirama imagined beside the river. Now he was gone, another victim of a war that seemed determined to consume everyone they loved. Standing over his brother's grave, Madara found himself asking the same question that had haunted him since childhood. How many people would have to die before the world finally changed? The death of Izuna marked a turning point in the history of the shinobi world. For Hashirama, it was another painful reminder that neither the Senju nor the Uchiha could ever truly claim victory. Every battle simply exchanged one family's grief for another's. Even when the Senju prevailed, they buried their own dead beside those of their enemies. There were no winners in the Warring States period, only survivors. Madara's loss was impossible for Hashirama to ignore. He had known Izuna as a child, long before either of them understood what it meant to be Senju or Uchiha. Seeing another brother fall to the endless conflict forced Hashirama to confront a painful truth. If someone as powerful as Madara could not protect the person closest to him, then no amount of individual strength would ever be enough to end the cycle. The war had reached its natural conclusion. Not because either clan had been defeated, but because both had grown exhausted. Generations had been consumed by fighting. Countless children had become soldiers before they understood why they were expected to kill. Every contract accepted by the Senju was answered by the Uchiha. Every Uchiha victory was eventually met with Senju retaliation. The balance of power between the two clans had become so even that decisive victories grew increasingly rare, while the losses continued to mount on both sides. Hashirama realized something few others were willing to admit. If the war continued, it would not end with one clan victorious. It would end with both clans destroyed. Rather than preparing for another campaign, Hashirama chose a different path. He approached Madara with the same dream they had once shared beside the river as children. The years had changed them both, but Hashirama had never abandoned the belief that peace was possible. He argued that the time had come to end the rivalry between the Senju and the Uchiha before another generation was sacrificed. Instead of allowing feudal lords to continue using shinobi clans as disposable armies, the clans themselves could unite under a single village, protecting one another rather than fighting endless wars for someone else's ambitions. It was an idea unlike anything the Shinobi world had ever known. For centuries, clans had survived by standing apart from one another. Trusting a rival clan with the safety of one's own family seemed almost unimaginable. Madara listened. More than anyone else alive, he understood the dream Hashirama described because he had helped create it. Years earlier, they had imagined exactly such a future while standing beside the river as children. But the world had changed since then. Madara had watched too many brothers die. He had buried too many friends. He no longer believed that trust alone could overcome generations of hatred. If the Senju and Uchiha reached an agreement, what would prevent the next generation from repeating the same mistakes? What would stop fear, ambition, or political rivalry from eventually tearing that peace apart? Hashirama acknowledged those concerns. He did not claim the plan was without risk. He simply believed that continuing the war guaranteed failure, while peace at least offered hope. For the first time since their childhood, Hashirama and Madara once again stood united by the same dream. The question was no longer whether peace was desirable. It was whether the Shinobi world was finally ready to accept it. That answer would reshape history forever.